Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the Sunday garden question and answer video that I do most Sundays. I'm actually down in Canton, Georgia at the Cox Arboretum. Their website is coxgardens.com if you want to go over there and check out their website. You have to register to there's a page if you want to visit this garden someday. There'll be an upcoming video with Tom Cox, his wife Evelyn, and their puppy coming up. I cannot even explain to you guys how beautiful this garden or how many interesting pieces there are in this garden. One of a kinds, two of a kinds, three of a kinds, you know, such rare plants, incredibly rare plants, and tons of conifers. It was one of the best conifer collections, if not the best conifer collection certainly in the Southeast United States. It's just really incredible. So you guys will see some of that in that video, but it will no way near capture the thousands of taxa that are in this garden. And it just this place blows my mind. It's one of the, they're you know, I get to learn a lot as we travel around. And thanks to you guys, and it's you guys watching these videos that open these doors, you know, where somebody makes a suggestion. Maybe you should go visit Tom Cox. Maybe you should go here. Maybe that's all because of you guys watching these videos, and then I get to go and see them, and then show them off to you, you know, to you. This place is, there's a lot to learn here. It's almost overwhelming, the amount of conifers that are here, and the conifers that will grow in the Southeast that you never thought could grow here. It's in a little perfect spot here above Atlanta in Georgia. So anyway, let's get to some questions. This ginkgo here behind us is called Saratoga. I know I'm going to be asked that. Beautiful fall color here as we're in this garden. This Tom Cox and Dr. John Reuter at UGA wrote a book on conifers and ginkgos for the Southeast, and so I'll link that book down below this video if you guys are interested in that book. I'm carrying a signed copy out of here, and I will definitely use it as a reference. There's so much great information on conifers that we can grow here in the South. Those of you in the North know, you know, all the great conifers that you see everywhere, but a lot of these do much better here than you would think. So we visited Mr. Maple. There's already one video up from that, and it was on conifers. And we visited Ram and Tom Giberson's home again. You guys will see that video sometime next week. I've still got a video from Jeremy Schmitz that I need to get up. And then, of course, this visit with Tom Cox. So a lot going on there. And I have a member. There's a little membership thing down below the videos. Those of you who are members, I try to have a once a month. I've wanted to have a once a month Zoom meeting with you guys. I'll send out that invitation sometimes this next week. I missed October, just super busy, but there will be one in November. And those of you, you'll get a link to that, which will be about 2 weeks from now. Okay, so let's get to some questions. When is a plant established? I always say when we're doing planting videos or videos on the garden plants with Jim Putnam channel, once it's established, you know, it's low maintenance. So what is established? It's a great question. I think it's just part of it depends on what time of year you're planting something. So I think if you're planting something in the spring, you're going to be responsible for it through that first summer and into that first winter, and then you'll want to monitor it probably into that spring as it's leafing out the following year. And this means bringing extra water to it, just being aware that it's different than the other plants in your landscape that have been in the ground for longer. So you're just, you know, recognizing it individually as it may have more needs than other things. But additional water, additional, you know, thoughtfulness that it's there and that it exists and that it's new. If you're planting something, you know, I know Tony Avon is a big proponent of planting things in, you know, in the heat of the summer when the roots are really growing, and then right up through early fall. You know, when you're still getting a lot of root growth, you know, those things can get established much quicker. It seems counterintuitive to plant in the summer, but I do know that things, because they're actively rooting at that time, you know, they'll actually root into the ground, but it requires more frequent observation of it. So, you want to look at it every day if you are planting in the summertime. If you're planting something in the fall and it's very hardy, hopefully it gets well established, well rooted in, and doesn't need you as much going into that next spring and summer, although, again, it's newer. So you'll want to keep an eye on it, go and check the water on it, see if it's wilting. Hopefully it's a plant that wilts. Some plants wilt. Conifers can thin or show you some, bare knee, old interior thinning that you'll get on conifers, how they'll let you know. Other things, unfortunately, just die. So, I would say something like a Japanese holly, like a sky pencil holly, compacta holly, soft touch hollies. Those things can just die and not do a very good job of letting you know. But it is a great question, and it's almost kind of unanswerable, really, as to monitor it until you feel like you don't have to monitor it. I would think that 2 winters in the ground. And if it's a plant that's not marginal in your area in some way, after it's got 2 winters in the ground, I think you're probably fine just treating it like everything else. Only watering it when you're watering the broader landscape, if that makes any sense. 2 winters in the ground, that's what I'm going to go with. Can you put wood chips in established beds? This is also a great question. Yes, you can definitely mulch with wood chips in existing beds, but I wouldn't go with the style of 12 inches of wood chips in existing beds. But you can use it for mulch. But do keep in mind, I've said before, I think it's kind of overblown how much nitrogen wood steals from your plants, but it does, and it has more impact on some things than other things. It's temporary the wood needs nitrogen to break down. It'll steal it from easy sources. And so temporarily, it can off-color some things, not all things, and cause an issue. So yeah, but if you're using a small amount of wood chips as mulch on existing things, I think you'll be absolutely fine. Just again, don't go in there and try to do the big soil modification thing that you've seen me do on just bare space, which is 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 inches of wood chips at one time. Do that on new areas that you're creating new beds in. Okay, new beds for. Okay, so does air temperature matter in producing seedlings? Probably some things more than others. So you'll see this winter seeding, things that folks do in milk jugs and things outside. I know that a lot of people will do their seeding in a garage, and so they may have a heat mat under the tray, but the ambient air temperature above the tray is quite cool, especially if you're using LEDs. I use fluorescent tubes for my seedlings in the house, and those fluorescents add heat, a little more electricity, but that heat is helpful. I think the heat and the light combining probably harden my seedlings off a little more than not having that ambient heat. I think some things more than others are affected by that. I prefer to do mine indoors, or if I was going to do them in a garage, I would use fluorescents because I want to add that heat to them. But I know people have no problem at all doing the winter seeding thing in milk jugs, and so definitely those jugs are cool inside overnight. There's no question that the air temperature is quite cool. And you think about seedlings that come up in the spring like that are going to go through periods of time. Where it's going to be cooler days in the spring as you're transitioning from winter to summer. So it's not like seedlings are incapable of handling up and downs on temperatures that you would get in that type of environment. But do I get a more compact, overall, thicker stemmed, hardier plant from doing them inside with a temperature that's more like 65, 68 degrees under those fluorescent tubes? It might be 70 some. Yeah, for sure. I'm probably getting a more consistent outcome. And those of you who have seen any of our planting of our vegetables or things that we've done in the house can see that, how much more compact they are in all likelihood than doing them in a cooler environment. More consistency, that's why I do them that way. And that's what I've said in the past about that. The entire seeding process that I have is all about producing the same thing over and over and over again. And that's the nurseryman in me. I want to produce 500 of something that looks exactly the same, because that's what customers want. Somebody asked, is it possible to have a beautiful garden without an irrigation system? So drip irrigation, overhead irrigation, whatever it is. Yeah, I think so. But that doesn't mean that I'm saying that you can have a beautiful garden, absolutely, with no water if you're using plants once they're established. Going back to that first question, once they're established in your garden, if you're in a place like Southeast United States or the Northeast where you're getting reasonable amounts of ongoing water for 12 months out of the year. You don't go 4 months in summer without rain like they do in Portland or someplace like that. Yeah, you can get away without having an irrigation system and still have a beautiful garden. Again, you're going to have to water initially. You're going to have to get things rooted in the ground and get them, off on their own. Can you have a garden that produces 6-8 months from spring into fall and still looks like it wasn't beat on, through the summer going into fall without giving some additional irrigation? Probably not. Maybe some summers you would just get lucky, but probably not. And so I have a drip irrigation installed at the house. We have not hooked it up. The only water that we've actually given that garden has been with a sprinkler that we've just moved around occasionally, and we do it as little as possible. So we're kind of letting the garden tell us when it needs water, and then we're watering. That's kind of how we've done it so far. So we have added additional water, but we're trying to do it because we're there most of the time and we're monitoring it, or we have somebody watching it. We just have them move a sprinkler around or us move a sprinkler around as little as possible. So it's a tough question. You can have a beautiful garden if you're selecting plants that don't need ongoing watering in the area that you're growing them in. So if you're in a desert climate, plants that are adapted to that climate. If you're in Pacific Northwest, plants that can take a very dry summer. If you're in the Southeast or Northeast, again, we're getting more regular rainfall, but we do go through 100-degree temps and if you're in the Northeast, very cold temps. If you're picking plants that are adapted to those things, you shouldn't need a tremendous amount of ongoing watering, and you're keeping the ground covered with mulch. Mulching is, can't say that enough, keeping the ground covered. I say it all the time. Combining all of those things to limit the amount of water you're using, that's been our strategy, and it's worked great so far. I haven't felt like I needed to hook up the drip irrigation because only occasionally are we throwing extra water out there. Okay, somebody wanted a propagation video update and how to overwinter those plants. So the only propagation video that I did this summer was showing the limbs bent over in the containers and then rooting them directly in the containers. And then after they were rooted, I just cut the plants away from the parent plant. And there you go, voila, I've got a new container plant. Overwintering them, all the things that were in that video are pretty hardy, plants. And they've been outside, they're not being babied, they're just in those containers sitting off to the side somewhere, so I could show them to you guys again. I'll just pack that stuff tight together, pull leaves up around them and go with it. If it's something that's marginal, I probably would bring it into a garage on the super cold nights, but no different than I'd treat anything else. We carry a lot of containers through the winter, most of which are just piled tight and leaves up around them. If it's something that's more marginal than that, it will need to come in occasionally. So that's that. And I might have another video at some point on that because I do have other things rooting as well. So I may show those off. Somebody asked, how do you know if a plant is patented? Is there some sort of database? No, there's not a database for it, but you can search any plant with the word patent. Obviously on the tags, it's going to say PP and the number. And there's a difference. We have to know the difference between a trademark name and then the patent. So people, we develop new plants, find new plants. You go through a patent process, and the plant patent lasts 20 years. Then we live in a world in which somebody wants to give something a fancy additional name or a group name. So an overall, as in like Encore Azaleas, there's 33 different Encore Azaleas. Encore is a trademarked name. That lasts, but the patent on the plants is only 20 years. And so there's two different things going on there. You'll see the TM for a trademark, and that's the world we're in right now with plants. You have a trademark name for the name that it's sold under, and that you guys know it as, and then you have the plant patent, and eventually the plant patent does run out. What was the what was the actual overall? But finding that, yeah, it's easily findable, and any tag you have, again, is going to have that PP with the numbers on the back of it, and you can, if you know the plant patent number, you can look it up and you can read about it and find out what was different about it when the plant patent is applied for. The person who applied for the plant patent, or the company, or the university, or the whoever it was applied for it, they have to describe how it is different from existing plants. So if it was this is not a patented plant, but this, as an example, this is a named cultivar of ginkgo, Saratoga. If it had been patented, it would had to have been described as what made it different from other ginkgos. And whether it was a chance seedling, or it was, just a branch off the side of it, or it was intentionally crossed to create, this tight, compact form. Maybe it holds its leaves longer than other ginkgos, which may drop them faster. Maybe it has an elongated leaf. There'd be a description online. You can look it up and see what it is that makes that plant different than the other ones. And you can't just apply for a plant patent and get it without you being able to describe in detail how it is different than the other ones that it came from. So there you go. Maybe that's interesting. How much protection does a screened porch offer? The biggest protection a screened porch is going to offer, unless it's screened, is going to be wind protection. I was going to say unless it's screened all the way to the ground, but even then it would offer some wind protection. So your biggest benefit in putting marginal plants on a screened porch on colder nights would be the wind. And wind is your biggest, potentially your biggest wind or biggest winter problem, because if the pot can freeze outside on the in a container on the ground, and then the wind blow across it, and because it can't get any water, it desiccates and it dies from just literally drying out. If it's on that screened porch, even if the pot freezes, you're liable to not have that desiccation, and so that would prevent that. In terms of actual temperature, though, or the roots freezing, not a whole lot. You might get 5 degrees out of it, but if the roots freeze solid, some plants just can't take their roots frozen solid. And so if you're I think it was Fatsia or something in the question, I would bring that in if you thought it was going to stay, the pot was going to stay frozen for any length of time. So guys in my area in zone 7B, if they're growing Fatsia, they'll have them in a hoop house. And so probably sometime around 3, 4, 5 in the morning, that pot was probably starting to freeze some, but very quickly in the morning, as soon as the sun's on that plastic, it's going to thaw out. So it's only going to be frozen maybe for just a few hours maximum before there's actual damage done to that plant. So again, if it's a marginal thing, you'll want to bring it in if you think it's going to stay frozen for 12 hours, 24 hours, something like that. But it does offer some protection, and mainly from the wind, which is the biggest enemy outside during the winter time when things are frozen, is the wind. Okay, is it normal for rhododendrons to drop leaves in the fall? So just big leaf rhododendrons? Yes, some. It may be worse some years than other years. It may be that it's drier. So if we have dry conditions going into fall, so I'm looking around at all these beautiful conifers in this garden, some of which you guys will see in a video. They're thinning more this year than they would other years. They're always going to lose some interior, do some interior thinning. If it's dry, it's going to be worse. And so the same thing with leafy evergreens. This is the time of year they do their shedding. We're calling them evergreens, but they do shed, and it tends to be in the fall worse on dry years. If it's happening excessively on one over and over, it may be that spot is just drier. There's some sort of the conditions that the space that it's actually occupying might not be favorable for it. So somebody said, what seeds would you recommend to put out for spring flowers? I did a video with Bree Arthur a year and a half ago or so about fall seeding of flowers, of flowering things, so things like poppies and several others, larkspur. I'm not going to remember everything right this minute, but several things that can be fall seeded in the upcoming weeks. Actually, you're not late for this. That can be seeded and have an early spring flowering show. The things that bloom later in the summer, the things that you could direct seed like zinnias or cosmos or sunflowers or those kinds of things, I would just wait until you're near your frost-free date in the spring to do those. But there are a few things that you can do now, and you can look up that video I did with Bree Arthur on the channel where she describes her process of doing that. If you're interested in seeding, if you just want to get out and work and do and seed something now that would be beautiful in the early spring, that would work. Somebody asked about Florida Sunshine Illicium as a foundation plant. Would it work as a foundation plant? Yes, in a part shade area, amazing foundation plant for sure. Look great against brick. There's a lot of uses for that Florida Sunshine Illicium, and great as a foundation plant. Keep in mind, the one at Juniper Level Botanic Garden, I think the original plant is probably 12 feet in height, maybe 15 feet in height. And if but it can be kept 4 to 6 feet. On the tag, it might say 4 to 6 feet or 6 to 8 feet or something like that. That's maintainable and it can be. So I wouldn't put it under a window that's 2.5 feet high. Want it under a window that was 6 feet high or in between windows or on a corner. Okay. Somebody asked if I'm going to be doing more pruning videos. Lots of pruning videos coming. That 0.19 acres is very full back in Raleigh, and it definitely needs some hardcore love. So, if you're uncomfortable watching plants get butchered, or no, not butchered, but but caught on, you'll want to avoid those videos. But sometime in February or March, you guys will see pruning videos. We've got to get that place. We have some things we're gonna have to get some control of. It's raining a little bit here. What program do I use to edit videos? I use Premiere Pro. It's an Adobe program, just like Photoshop or Lightroom or After Effects. It all comes in a one bundle. It's not the most inexpensive thing in the world, but it's what I've been using since the beginning. When I first started using it, it wasn't a paid subscription thing, and then they went to a subscription thing, and it's not my favorite bill every month. But it is a very good program. There are free programs out there, and you can edit them on your phone. You don't have to, I say to anybody starting off on anything, these phones have become such good devices, and you can edit video right in it. And so there's really no real reason to go out and spend a ton of money to start with on something. Okay. So somebody bought a 1 gallon Norway spruce. I think is what it was. Yeah, a 1 gallon weeping Norway spruce, and then didn't water it as much as they needed to, or it got abused in some way, which happens. I showed an abused plant going in the ground in a video yesterday, or 2 days ago as you're seeing this. So that happens. And a lot of the needles have dropped off the top. It still has some bottom foliage. Should they just get another one? Probably. It's alive. You could plant it. It will maybe come back. But once you get to that point with a super slow growing conifer like that, it would take so long for it to come back. I don't think that you would enjoy it, the process of waiting. So for me, if you could find a good deal on one right now, that might be a plant I would replace. I might put that other one to the side and pot it into another container next year and see if you can make something interesting out of it. But in terms of, putting one in the ground in some sort of special place that you were going to put it, I think you would be annoyed with how long it's going to take for it to recover. When to fertilize shrubs? The reason I picked this question was because a lot of people do want to fertilize now, and I just don't do any fertilizing now. You can fertilize your garden once everything has gone completely dormant. And so once everything's past its growth, there'd be no harm in fertilizing at that time because you wouldn't be pushing any growth on the plants. But the fertilizer would just be sitting there until it can be used in the spring. Especially organic fertilizers wouldn't do anything because they require soil microbe activity, which would be very slow in the winter months. And so I fertilize everything toward the end of February. I think I did it a little early last year just to show off. And the only reason I did it early was just because I wanted to show off what I was doing and when I was doing it. But anytime from late February through really the 1st of June, anytime in that window that you want to fertilize, you can. I tend to grab handfuls of organic fertilizer and just sling it in the air, as you've seen. You know, that's my method, and I tend to fertilize the entire space and not an individual plant. And so I don't come over here to a tree or a shrub and just throw it up under it. I cover the entire space. I assume that the roots are, you know, the roots are out into the surrounding soil as well. I'm trying to grow, what I'm really at the end of the day trying to do is keep healthy fungi and bacteria, beneficial fungi, beneficial bacteria, healthy under the ground. And so I'm doing that by keeping it covered in mulch, using a little bit of organic fertilizer, watering when it's extremely dry, and I'm trying to keep those things healthy because those are the things that actually feed your plants. And so, you know, at the end of the day, I'm actually at the end of the day, I'm actually putting up a fertilizer video to show you guys how little I fertilize. So that'll be sometime around late February. Let's see. I had a couple people say they had planted crooked trees, crooked small plants, and wanted to know if they should stake them or not, or whether or not they would straighten themselves out. They may straighten themselves out some, but for me, if I wanted a truly straight trunk on something and it was crooked as I'm planting it, I'm probably going to go ahead and stake that. It's the easiest time you'll ever have to stake it because it's still wispy and it moves and it, you know, it's pliable is the correct word for it, is the right word for it. So that you can, you know, you can take the green stretchy tie and you can actually pull it right up against the stake while it's young and easy. Once it's, you know, got some size or some girth on it, it comes much, much harder. So while it's small, if I planted something crooked and I wanted it straight, easiest time to ever stake it, especially going into winter here. You could keep it staked through next spring. Test it, taking it off early next summer. If it springs back crooked again, you may stake it for just a little while longer, but move the ties around occasionally so that they don't damage the tree. Okay, a couple more here before we're, and we'll wrap this up, this Georgia edition of the Q&A. Somebody wanted an update on the Feeling Blue Deodar cedar. They wanted to grow one. They were wondering about growing it in the south, or, you know, how it was holding up, because they're in zone 8. Deodar cedar is super heat tolerant. I mean, we're talking down to zone 10 kind of heat tolerant. So if you're worried about heat on a deodar cedar, don't worry anymore. That's the perfect conifer. So, you know, things like junipers. Let's see what else. Junipers, cryptomeria, a lot of our Chamaecyparis, and things like deodar cedar. Those are our best southern conifers, although I'm in a conifer garden right now with firs and spruces and all kinds of things that you wouldn't think would grow here in the south in this beautiful conifer garden in Canton, Georgia. So this place is literally blown my mind. You guys will see some of that in that video. But again, I can't really put this in a video, really, how amazing this place is. Okay, and then last question for this week, and again, thank you guys for participating. You can ask gardening questions down below this video, and I pick from those each week. I try to pick relevant ones like I've done here, like how to overwinter something as we're going into winter, not to fertilize now, or I wouldn't fertilize now, and, you know, just in general, I'm trying to pick things that are relevant and things that people might be thinking about right now. So somebody asked about replacing a bee balm that gets powdery mildew. So they've got two things. Number one, there are newer bee balms that are much more resistant to powdery mildew. So you can definitely upgrade your bee balm if you still, if you have one that gets, completely covered in powdery mildew. I don't know that I'd put that one right back in that same spot. If you were replacing a bee balm with a bee balm, I might move that over somewhere else in the garden. But this is always a question I get about, can you put a disease, something that has a problem, can you come back with something else in that space? I would go with something that's powdery mildew resistant, okay, in that space. So come back with a shrub that's just not something that doesn't get powdery mildew, and put it in that space. And the only reason I say that, a lot of times these disease problems are very specific to that plant. So I don't really know. I mean, it may be that the powdery mildew that bee balm gets is different than the powdery mildew that upright garden phlox gets. It may be that they don't even share the same powdery mildew. I don't know. It likely is the same. But if regardless of whether they didn't share the same powdery mildew, I wouldn't come back in with upright garden phlox into that space, because I know it's just a space that is holding in more moisture, doesn't have as good air movement. Whatever it is making plants that are prone to powdery mildew more likely to get powdery mildew, if that makes any sense. So even if it was so I would avoid plants in that space that are apt to get powdery mildew, and make sure, even if you're planting a newer variety of bee balm that's more resistant to it, make sure they're out in open space where they can get some air movement across the top of them. That dew doesn't stay on them all morning long. Same thing with garden phlox and some other plants that, although there are also new garden phlox that are very, very resistant to powdery mildew as well. So thank you guys for participating. I think that's about 16, 17 questions from last week's video, and I hope a lot of great content this week. Tom, this garden is absolutely amazing, the Cox Arboretum in Canton, Georgia. Thanks for watching.